Standing by the ocean at night is an entirely different experience, isn't it?
It is. Same smell, same sounds. You see the glowing white foam as the waves break on the shore, but beyond that, it's like a sea of black ink.
Ray, the reason we're here at night on the northern shore of Block Island, just off the coast of Rhode Island, is because we're scanning that inky black darkness in search of a burning ghost ship. Hey, I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger, and welcome to episode 29 of the New England Legends podcast. If you give us a few minutes, we'll give you something strange to talk about today. I've heard tales of phantom ships before, Jeff. I guess the Flying Dutchman off the coast of South Africa would be the most famous. The ocean is home to countless legends like that.
I love the Flying Dutchman legend. The story goes back to at least the 18th century. It's a tattered, ghostly ship that can never make port. They say if your vessel is hailed by the Flying Dutchman, they may ask you to carry some mail or messages to shore. And if you accept the parcels, you and your ship are doomed. Even spotting the Flying Dutchman is said to be a bad omen.
Oh, please tell me that the Flying Dutchman has been spotted by Block Island.
No, it hasn't. I'm just making the point that sailors have been a superstitious bunch for centuries.
Okay, I get that. So what's the story here on Block Island?
While the Flying Dutchman's origins are vague, this story on Block Island is based on some hard, horrible facts.
All right, let's set this up.
Okay, our story begins in Rotterdam, Holland, in August of 1738. The 220-ton British ship Princess Augusta, with Captain George Long at the helm, is ferrying 340 German immigrants from the Palatinate region of Germany to Philadelphia. But this voyage seemed doomed from the start.
The first problem the Princess Augusta faced was their water.
What do you mean?
Well, the water supply was contaminated, and soon passengers and crew started getting sick with what they described as fever and flux.
Was it serious?
Deadly serious. In the coming weeks of travel, 200 passengers died from illness, and half the crew, including Captain George Long.
If that wasn't bad enough, the next adversary came from the sea and skies. With Captain Long dead, first mate Andrew Brooke takes command of the ship, just as the weather turns on him. For the next few months, storms and gale winds push the Princess Augusta north, far off course of Philadelphia. The headwind forces the ship to crawl westward at a snail's pace. And then, another problem.
Food?
Food. Supplies are running out.
First mate, now Captain Andrew Brooke, forced his remaining passengers to pay for the few rations they had left, meaning only the wealthiest could potentially survive.
That's horrible.
It is a desperate act to line his pockets and poor leadership.
But the morning after Christmas of 1738, luck seemed to finally be turning for the Princess Augusta. The seas were calm as she sat anchored just 12 miles off the New England coast. Captain Brooke ordered the sails set, and they steered for Long Island Sound between Block Island and Long Island, New York. The passengers and crew had hope for the first time in months that they would soon make a port, but the sea wasn't through with them yet.
Shortly after they set off for the day, a storm moved in. The seas swelled. The winds raged once more, this time from the north-northwest. And then came the snow squalls, lowering visibility to only a few hundred feet.
The Princess Augusta fought the storm, which battered and bruised the ship. Under the strain, her hull sprung a leak and began to take on water. The mizzenmast was ordered cut down because the crew feared the ship was ready to break in half from the pounding.
If not for bad luck, this ship and her passengers and crew would have no luck at all.
But suddenly, the crew spots a turning light beacon up ahead. They'll find out soon that this is Block Island. Knowing they're in trouble, they make for the beacon and the salvation that only land can offer. Now, Ray, let me ask you a question. Think about every lighthouse you've ever seen in your life. Where are the beacons placed?
Well, I've only ever seen a lighthouse placed on a rock in the water or right at the edge of the shore.
Exactly, because that's where they have to be placed. This light, far in front of the Princess Augusta, let them know that land was still a fair distance away. If they make for the light, they should be able to come around and find a place to set the ship. But then
the Princess Augusta runs aground. Her hull breaches, and she's wrecked in the shallow waters just off the coast of the northern shore, a place they call Sandy Point on Block Island.
But then a curious thing happens. That light in the distance ahead, it goes out.
It goes out?
Poof, gone.
Why would a lighthouse shut down during a storm?
Because it wasn't a lighthouse. It was a horrible trick.
All right, I don't understand this.
Once the ship was run aground, Andrew Brooke lowers the rowboat with he and his crew, then rows to shore, leaving all the passengers on board by themselves. The following day, more rowboats come and take the passengers to shore, while other locals take their own boats out and salvage whatever they can find in the ship. But one female passenger refuses to leave her belongings on the ship, and she stays behind.
So what about that light they saw on shore?
The story goes there were some bad people on Block Island who intentionally set that beacon far inland as a way to lure a ship too close to the shore where it would wreck. Once it wrecked, they could take small boats out to the ship and turn their salvage into profits.
That's despicable.
Once the locals had salvaged what they could, the Princess Augusta was ordered to be set adrift and burned. That female passenger who refused to leave, she stayed. People on shore could hear her screams as the vessel burned and sunk below.
Wow, that's really haunting.
It is. But there's another version of the story. For help, let's make a phone call.
Is that really his phone number?
My name's Dr. Michael Bell. I'm a folklorist, living in Rhode Island sometimes and other times in Texas.
We asked Dr. Bell what happened once the Princess Augusta was wrecked.
Well, I'm thinking about the deposition that was found in the Rhode Island Historical Society archives around 1925, and that had been missing for a long time.
Depositions were taken from passengers and crew after the incident as to what happened. Dr. Bell speaks with Block Island historian Fred Benson, who explains that the Princess Augusta's first mate turned captain is not a good guy. Turns out Andrew Brooke had good reason not to want his passengers to go ashore.
The trunks of the people, the Palatine Lights, were being looted. So he didn't want that revealed. And they were wrecked off Block Island, and they were on a cable. And the people were imploring him to cut the cable, let them go, ashore to save them. And he finally relented, and the Block Islanders saved many of the people on board. That's the historically, supposedly accurate story of what happened.
The ship was then scuttled, possibly burned so the wreckage wouldn't create future navigational problems. And there's no record of any woman burning with the ship. But still, I wonder, how do we get the other version of this story?
So Dr. Bell explained how in 1867, now this is 129 years after the fact, John Greenleaf Whittier writes this poem called The Wreck of the Palatine, which is what most people called the Princess Augusta once the story had passed into legend.
Got it. Most people incorrectly call the Princess Augusta the Palatine.
Exactly. So this poem is based on a story Whittier had heard about people who would set up false lights to lure ships to their doom in order to loot them. You have to remember, if a ship wrecked back then, it's your right to salvage the remains.
Unless, of course, you wrecked the ship with the intent of looting. So, if this was the case of bad luck, and the Block Islanders helped and didn't loot, how did the Palatine Light story happen?
Well, John Greenleaf Whittier wrote a poem called The Wreck of the Palatine. Yeah, he had received a letter in the late 1860s from a man named John Hazard. And John Hazard told him that story about the Block Islanders setting up a false light to lure the ship ashore so that they could plunder it. And Whittier had experimented with a ghost ship poem earlier, like in the 1830s, and it didn't work out. And he thought, well, this is a good way to get back to it. So he wrote the Wreck of the Palatine using that version, that it was the Block Islanders who were really the ones responsible for the wreck and for the plundering of the goods on the ship.
Here's a few lines from John Greenleaf Whittier's poem. Down swooped the wreckers like birds of prey, tearing the heart of the ship away, and the dead had never a word to say. And then, with ghastly shimmer and shine, over the rocks and the seething brine, they burned the wreck of the Palatine.
Well done, Ray. I like that. So Whittier's poem gets popular. The depositions of the actual passengers and crew from 1738 are missing.
And this poem version turns into the real story. Who would actually do something like this? Setting up a false light to lure ships?
As Dr. Bell explained, that story in practice had gone on for a long time. So, for example, have you ever heard of Nag's Head?
Sure, a pretty coastal town in North Carolina.
The story goes it got its name because nefarious locals used to take a horse, a nag, and place a lantern around its neck and walk him in circles near the shore to look like a lighthouse in order to lure in ships to their doom where they could then be plundered.
And I collected a story like that in the early 1980s from an older man on Block Island who said that when he was a child, which would have been in the early 20th century, people would sometimes put a lantern around the neck of a mule and lead it in a circle around a haystack, the turning light of a lighthouse, in order to lure coal barges ashore. And then they would go down and collect the coal. He said when he was a kid, he would go down and collect it. They'd have enough to last the whole winter to heat the house and even sell some.
That is cold-blooded. Risking people's lives to plunder?
So you have this sinister practice of setting a false light that was done all along the coast. You have the real shipwreck of the Princess Augusta, or the Palatine, if you prefer that name. And now we have a burning ghost ship that's most often spotted during the anniversary of the wreck, shortly after Christmas each year. The crazy thing is, something haunts these waters. Even in modern times, people will spot the glow of a burning ghost ship on these waters. They call it the Palatine Light.
Man, standing out here in the dark right now, that definitely gives me chills. I usually think of Block Island as this New England paradise that welcomes tourists. But because of Whittier's poem, there's a tiny bit of dark stain here.
I think the poem cemented the version of the Block Islanders as plunderers. People on Block Island are not really fond of John Greenleaf Whittier.
Be sure to check out our website at OurNewEnglandLegends.com, where you can listen to all of our past episodes for free. You can see images related to these stories and post comments and feedback. We love hearing from you guys. And there's also our Facebook group, also called New England Legends. Join us.
And if you're not already a subscriber to our weekly podcast, it's free. Do it so you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And do us a favor and post a review on iTunes. It's a big way that you can help us spread the word.
Until next time, remember, the bizarre is closer than you think.